Welcome to HR Voices, a podcast where people leaders share their side of the story. We talk about the challenges they're facing, how they're addressing them, and what changes they hope to see as the workplace evolves. This podcast is sponsored by All Voices, the all-in-one employee relations platform. Hello, and welcome to HR Voices. I'm your host, Rebecca Taylor, and I'm here with Stacy Winsett, Chief People Officer, RATP Dev USA. Stacy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to have you because I know that your time is very hard to get. You're in the middle of a book tour. You're a high-powered chief people officer. So thank you so much for being here on our show, here to talk about kind of, this particular scenario that I know that we're very excited to dive into. Are you ready for your scenario?
I'm ready. Give it to me.
Okay. So we're calling this one the shortcut termination. A customer support manager stretched across 2 open headcount gaps and managing 14 direct reports fires an employee on the spot after a heated customer escalation call. No PIP, no written warnings, no HR consultation. He documents the termination the following day with backdated performance notes pulled from memory. 6 months later, the employee, a Filipina woman, files a discrimination complaint. During discovery, metadata on the performance documentation reveals it was created after the termination date. Billy collapses. What might have been a defensible termination with prior process becomes a 6-figure settlement. HR must also reckon with why a manager carrying an unsustainable workload was never flagged as a flight risk or a liability risk. So there's a lot to unpack in this one. There are more layers than the usual ones. So before we dive into a lot of the different sort of pieces that are making this, sort of that we need to kind of look at, what stands out to you as the most risky or unclear in this scenario?
Gosh, that's exciting because there's a lot here.
A lot of it, right?
I mean, I think the lack of documentation is always what I go to. I think that one is just, if you don't have the documentation, it didn't happen from a legal perspective. And so I think to me that's the riskiest overall, for sure.
Yeah.
Look at
Yeah,
this.
Documentation is everything.
Yeah, I think obviously that workload too, which is an interesting one. I have a feeling we'll get into that, but I think that the workload is kind of that secondary thing, which may not necessarily be the manager's fault. But boy, that documentation is, because I'm pretty sure that HR department probably already done some training and sure about documentation. If I'm a guessing person.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. And it's documentation with the correct timestamps too, because they put documentation in from memory after the termination, but that just, ruins any credibility of anything that could have been a valid termination.
Right. If they didn't give the documentation and the person didn't get the copy of it, right, it didn't happen. Even if they get the documentation timely and they never issued it, it's not really worth much if they never gave it to them.
Yeah, that's true. If the employee doesn't know, if the employee was never given a chance to actually improve off the PIP or deal with whatever issues it were that were causing low performance, it might as well have just been, we're not even going to bother with this, which is a whole other issue. So from this scenario, and I always say this, these scenarios are fabricated, so we don't have any more information than what's here because it's, they're not real people. So we have to make some assumptions and kind of navigate a little bit of the gray, which I think we're good at because that's what HR people do. We live in the gray. So from the way that this scenario is written, it sounds like this did move to a discrimination claim that led to a settlement. So not one where we're trying to avoid a settlement, but one where we got there and now we're kind of like looking around and saying, okay, how did this happen? How do we prevent this? So from the timestamp of the settlement has happened, now we have to deal with the other stuff that's here. Where do you begin your investigation process? Who do you talk to? What kinds of information are you looking for?
Yeah, and I would hope that we would already be in the middle of this long before that actual settlement, right? I think that, I mean, depending on, because I guess it depends on how long it took to get to the settlement. But the minute you're aware, obviously, I'm going to deep dive into understanding what documentation do we have, and it really get deep into what has happened. Can we prove? I always, when we're preparing for either an arbitration or a board of adjustment or an EEOC case, I'm always asking who, what, when, where, why, right?
Yeah.
And the manager will state, this is what happened. We'll also, well, how can you prove that's what happened? How do we know what's happened? Was the employee aware of the policy? Right? We have proof that they signed off on the policy. I mean, you have to be able to literally button up I always tell them, think about law and order. You're in a courtroom and you're going to have to prove up everything that comes out of your mouth. You need to be able to prove up what happened, when did you have a witness, right? And so I'm going to want to go deep into all of that documentation. And if there is none, I'd be asking the questions, okay, well, why? Right? Why wasn't this done? Did you receive training as a manager on investigation practices? Right? Where was the breakdown there between you and your boss? Did HR fail to give you that training? And what in the world were you thinking of, that you would backdate documentation? That would be, hopefully at some point, I would be starting to think about, our values as a company, and how do they, and I certainly in my company, our values very clear, and we lead with them every day. And I can't even imagine a manager thinking that that would be okay. So that would be another little piece I'd want to deep dive on.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. And I think a part of this that needs to kind of come into the conversation early is the stretched across 2 open headcount gaps and managing 14 direct reports. So this manager is not positioned to make sound decisions, right? So it sounds like, they have 14 direct reports. It's a customer support situation. So you're talking about people who are, navigating maybe customer complaints, customer issues. When you're in support, people don't always come to you to tell you how wonderful they are. A lot of times they're, you're dealing with people who are disgruntled or unhappy. And so, it says that this employee was fired after a heated escalation call.
Right.
So tense situation, high cortisol, high stress. I know we can't go back in time in this fake scenario, but let's put ourselves back in this moment. Let's say a manager does hear that this escalation. What could they have done differently in that moment that may have avoided this whole thing altogether?
So let me ask you a question, just a clarifying question here. Was the firing manager the one that got heated? Do we know that or not?
I imagine not, just because. Well, actually, I don't know. That's a good
I know.
question.
I was taking this as maybe it was the manager himself that, or between the two of them, it got heated and escalated. So I don't know. Okay, let's assume that it was the employee.
We could assume either, right?
Yeah,
That's kind of
right?
the fun of this.
Right.
Is like both could be true. It's a
Right.
Schrodinger's termination.
And this is let's call it, say this is an employee, because I literally had this very similar scenario last week. We had an employee when we were terminating, and it got heated, and not that we were getting heated, it was just that, they were reacting. And I think the thing that we have to do as HR professionals, as managers, sometimes people just need to feel heard. And, the worst thing you can do is do tit for tat. You have to be able to, right, take that step back, just let them get it out. And sometimes, once they feel heard, then they're able to calm down a little bit. Or maybe you get what you need to say out of the way and say, look, let's talk tomorrow, right? I want to give you some time. I know this has been a lot, right? Give them some understanding and just kind of bring that pressure down and say, let's talk tomorrow. I know this is a lot. I know this is getting heated. Let's take take some time, because I really want to make sure we hear each other, and I've got all of the feedback, or all of depending on the situation. So I think I would have done that, especially, and before you even get to termination, because you know what's going on in that person's life. I mean, this person could be dealing with a family member that's on hospice, right? They could be. We have employees, some of them that are borderline homeless, right? There's so much going on in their life that you may not realize, and this is just it just came out. So maybe that's what happened, and they made one bad mistake, and they called their manager a bad name, whatever it was. Is that really how we want to end their career? If it was a one-time thing, if they were a good employee up to that point, I'd be asking the question, what drove them to that?
Yeah. I think that is the exact question: is how did we get here? A lot of times in investigations, there's the combination of the things that happened, the objective, like, facts of the things that occurred. But then a lot of the conversations sort of revolve around intent, the context around it, and how did we get here? Because I don't think every mistake deserves termination, right?
No,
Like,
because I wouldn't be employed, right? I was having this conversation yesterday, and I talk about giving psychological safety with my teams, and it's so true. I'm just blunt with them, guys. I've actually sent a demographic file out to the masses to the masses via email with pay before accidentally.
Oops.
You know, it doesn't get much worse than that. So you're probably good, right? we're going we're going to get through it, no matter what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's true. And there is a lot of fear of making mistakes in general now because, there's so much talk about companies that are downsizing and how AI is replacing jobs, all of these narratives, whether the facts are true or not, the narratives are there. So they impact how people relate to work, whether they feel like their job is actually in danger or not, they think of things differently. And so there's a lot of pressure, whether it's real or fabricated, right? To not mess up, because if you are on the, if you're ever on the chopping block, you want to at least say like, well, I never messed up like maybe someone else did.
Right.
And so it's created sort of scenarios where, sometimes people aren't taking risks that they should in their job. It's hard for them to be creative, and they're just in this sort of like space of just fear, and that's never good. That never goes well.
Absolutely. And you don't get that real productivity. And I will tell you, when I see my team and we have this code word, because my personality style is and so I just tell them, look, when I'm going too fast, I give you total permission to say, whoa, hang on a minute, Stacy. And that's immediately when they say that, it's immediate. I know that's my code word. I step back and say, okay, I'm going too fast, right? I start laughing. And we have fun with it. And they have that space to be able to say, whoa. And because of that, I get a ton more productivity from them, right? It's genuine. It's well thought out. They're not operating from that fear. Yeah. One of the things I was thinking about this particular case, some of this could be cultural too. Right? It is a Filipino woman, and we don't know who this manager was. Do they completely not understand each culture? Could he have done something that offended her that he had no idea? And I share that because, I'm an American Indian woman, but we have a very diverse group within our company, and so I'm always really careful. There's things that we just say naturally, these colloquialisms and things that we say and saying that you really don't know that there may be meaning behind them for other culture. And luckily people that are close to me have said, Stacy, I don't know if you knew this or not, but when you say this, there's actually some context behind it. You might want to be careful. And I was, just mortified because I would have had no idea. And so it's sometimes things can get crossways just because of that. And I think that's why it's so important to dig deep into what happened that one episode that all of a sudden you're wanting to just, get rid of a good employee. It takes a lot, as you know, to get people in the door and keep them. And right. And in our business, it is important that we keep our people. We hire a ton of CDL drivers and top mechanics and technicians, and we can't afford to keep losing those, right? We spend a lot of time and effort to find them, and so I really want to know what's going on before we say.
Yeah. Oh, I'm with you. It's kind of like you want to look back and see, have there ever been any claims made against this manager, either by this employee or by other people? And I think sometimes that can be hard data to find if the company doesn't have an anonymous reporting system or an actual one that, an identifiable performance like system, right? It's like you have to be able to understand if managers do have behaviors that are causing tension on the team, and not with ill will, right? There's intent and impact, and both things matter in every single, kind of conversation. So it could be that, maybe this manager doesn't really, give coaching or guidance, like, and what's interesting is like when I read sort of the quote facts of this fabricated scenario, I think of it, sort of two ways now that we've kind of talked this through a little. Like there's the manager who, fires the employee after heated escalation call, because they're just like, they're at their wit's end. It's whatever happened was so egregious that it needs to just go. And then they put in performance notes because they're like, oh, this is the stuff that I've been meaning to document, but I couldn't because I'm stretched so thin and have all these things. So maybe the things that are from memory are fact, but the credibility is gone because they're putting them in afterwards, right? Then there's the other side of it, which is a little bit more nefarious, which is this manager knows that they messed up. And now they're like, oh, I have to make sure that I have some sort of a pathway here that shows that, there were performance issues and that it wasn't just this one incident. And we're never going to know which one is the truth. And there are probably 10 other ways this could look at too. But I think that's kind of the part of this that is kind of interesting, is like the documentation is where the case is made or broken, and
Right.
the facts that got you there don't weigh as much as how it's captured.
And think about this, 15, even as soon as 15 years ago, there wasn't metadata, right? You might have discovery, but for the most part, you wouldn't be able to go back and forensically look to see when that was done, right? You might have a note to file, a memo to file. It would be lots of ways. But now with the internet and AI and all this metadata, yeah, you can't get away with stuff like that.
Yeah. And even there's a lot, there's so much more data now in general than there was, especially with the rise of AI. Everything is all about sort of, putting all of your data into one place and figuring out how to tell the story behind all the different little systems that we use that capture how we work. Not even just within HR, just in general, right? We all have the way we show up to work. We interact with so many different people, systems, things that we touch. And so there's so many different ways you can measure and look at how an employee's experience might be or what risks might be in the company. And I want to kind of look at the last sentence that's in this scenario, which is HR must also reckon with why a manager carrying an unsustainable workload was never flagged as a flight risk or a liability
Right,
risk.
right.
That to me is like, there's something there,
Yeah.
right?
Well, exactly. And I think too, as I think about everything on HR's plate and what takes the most of our attention, workforce planning is always one of the last things. And so I think it's
Yep.
critical as an executive team. I think it starts at the top. You have to be looking at that. Because of all the change that is happening in the world, our company's really good at this. We look at our organization probably. I mean, let's call it twice a year, but sometimes it could be even every quarter. We literally are looking to see, do we have this right? We went through a big salary grade exercise. Gosh, it was about a year ago, and we went through every role in the organization with the span of control. Is this right? And we made a lot of decisions and changes at that point in time. But and so when we go to look at promotion, that needs to be part of the review, right? If someone leaves and we're going to be replacing it or we're going to eliminate a position, that's when that review needs to happen right there. We were looking at this scenario last week. I have an open HR director role, and we're looking at, well, what can we do differently, because we're bumping up to a capacity issue, and I really need another set of hands versus one. So if I could get two out of one, but we looked at what does that do from a span of control, and yeah, that gets you up to 10, 11 direct reports, and we really started questioning that, because that's not going to be sustainable long term. So what else do we need to do in order, if we have to go that route for in the short term, let's just know what we're doing and know how we're going to offload some extra workload along the way. Or, instead of weekly one-on-ones, maybe it's bi-weekly, or depending on the criticality of the location. If it's a large location, maybe they get it, once a week. If it's some of the ones that don't have issues often, maybe it's every 2 weeks. But that's the time to really be thinking and making the decisions. And that's where HR needs to. We know these transitions are happening. We have to step in and say, hold on a minute, let's think about this.
Yeah. I think that's the hard part, because, there's a lot of push right now in the time and season that we're in of the workforce, where, AI is making people into these super workers, quote unquote, whether that's true or substantiated, we're sort of okay. So people are becoming these super workers, which some companies are looking at it as, we need fewer people, and fewer managers. So a manager can manage many more people,
Yeah.
because and a manager isn't going to just manage anymore, which is it's not a new concept, right? The concept of a player coach style manager job description has been around for a while, where you have your individual contributor work plus you're now responsible for people. And I think this is just a scenario that kind of indicates the risk of that, right? Because you could have a lot of people that are performing really highly, but you don't then have the capacity to navigate a situation when it needs to be navigated. Like, you're not going to be making the right decisions. You're going to be operating from a place of, fear, survival, or just general, I don't have time for this. And
Who's
that's
coaching?
where, sorry.
Yeah, and who's really coaching them, right?
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
they're, I don't care who we are, what level we are, we
Yeah.
need to always be developing.
Yeah.
And my boss is constantly looking for continuous improvement. And if we never had those conversations, that's not going to ever improve.
Yeah.
So that's where it's those conversations that happen. And if you've got 11 of them, I mean, I had 8 or 9 at one point, and it was a lot to try to get
Yeah.
just all of those one-on-ones, and the one-on-ones become, okay, what's going on? Like, you catch me up
Right.
instead of let's talk about your development.
Right. Right. Because you have so much more work that you're responsible
Mhm.
for among all those direct
Yeah.
reports. So it turns into a status update. Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because it's like, you think about one-on-ones as 30 minutes on your calendar or however long it is, but there's a whole human attached to that with a
Mm,
whole human life and a whole human thing that they might be bringing into that conversation. And if your nervous system isn't regulated enough to be present in that conversation, then how are you going to navigate that well?
yeah.
And it creates risks like this,
Right.
right? Like, because there's the story where there was legitimate performance concern, but there was no time to like
Mhm.
really coach, move
Yeah.
through it, document it, whatever. So we got here and then it just
Yeah.
became this type of
And
issue.
and what's
And then there's the
bad,
other one where it's not.
and it's sad, you lose 2 people out of this.
Yeah.
And you lose the
Yeah.
whole credibility. The company loses credibility. That manager loses credibility. And depending
Yeah.
on, the rumor mill in the industry, that person's credibility could be shot for the entire industry.
Yes.
And so it breaks my heart, because again, you hate that people resort to that they felt like they had to go there instead of asking for help to say, hey, this is where I am, right? How can HR help me? And I always try to tell people, and I use the scenario, this sounds really bad, but the show Scandal, did you ever watch Scandal?
No, I know of it,
With
but
Karen
I've never seen
Washington.
it.
Well,
Yeah.
I tell my managers if they know about this show, I'll say, we're your Olivia Pope, right? We're the ones that are going to help you, right? If you get into trouble, you're going to call us and we're going to get you out. And
Yeah.
they're going to show you that if you do it again, then we're going to go bury the body, right? And we do that tongue in cheek, obviously, but it's to help them understand we're here to help you. No, seriously,
Yeah.
we're not the hatchet department. We're truly there to be your partner to help you be your best that you can be. And when you get in those tough situations, that's what we're here for.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is an argument for HR, which I know is sort of a
Yeah.
buzzwordy term that a lot of people are kind of using in different ways. But with the way that I would define what proactive HR could do in a scenario like this is, constantly looking at things like headcount. You talked about doing headcount planning quarterly, even just to double check, like, do we have the right amount of people? How is everybody doing? I do think that that's like the perfect example of what I'm talking about because when you have people that are stretched too thin for too long, either because, their workload is too high or their span of control is too wide, whatever that situation is, that is something that needs to be addressed. It can't be something that you're just telling people like, well, just deal with it or just keep your head down and keep going. Like that's not sustainable. And from a business perspective, that's not even smart. So it's like, there is data that shows you that can sort of give you some insight that says, hey, maybe this is someone, maybe you've never had an issue with them, maybe it's never been raised, but maybe have a conversation with this person, check in with them. Because if they haven't had time to document their own performance
Mhm.
issues with their team, maybe they haven't had time to document their own issues with themselves and their own
Right.
asks, right? They could just
Right.
be on the wheel.
And in my book I talk about this a lot about that over functioning because at some point they are going to hit a wall, something's going to happen, they're going to explode, and these people, you can see them, you can see when someone's over functioning when they're and I'm one of the worst, right? If they're up doing emails at 4 and 5 a.m. and they're still doing emails at midnight, or all throughout the weekend, and that they're a workaholic. Not that some people are just wired that way, but you got to at
Yeah.
least ask that question: is everything okay? Are you feeling
Yeah.
the pressure to be able to do those things? Are you taking care of yourself? And those are the conversations I don't think we're great at having because being there for everyone else and coming through for everyone and being able to handle a big workload is generally rewarded as a leader.
Mm. Yeah.
But it's at some point, right, that's going to come due. It's going to come due in either their performance, in their health. And so, I've recognized that. That's part of the book. I've recognized, what is the cost? And so how do we recognize that with our own people, and how do we put those boundaries in? And luckily, we have a French parent company, and they're fantastic at boundaries. And
Yeah.
they literally put in their email, know that if this email finds you after hours, you don't have to respond. I was like, well, I'm not
Yeah.
brave enough to do that in the U.S. yet, but I love it. It's a lofty goal that I hope that we can get there at some point.
Yeah.
Because the U.S. in general, we're not great at that self care yet.
No.
But man, I hope
No.
we get there.
I love that you say that with a growth mindset. We're not there yet.
We're
Hopefully we
going to
will
get
be.
there.
Yeah.
Well, I think once you recognize it and we
Yeah.
start talking about it, and again, if you have a healthy leadership team, man, that makes all the difference too. We have a really
Yeah.
healthy leadership team, and so we're able to talk about those things, openly. It doesn't mean that we're not going to still drive fast. That we are. We've got so much
Yeah.
to get done, but we're constantly looking at what else can we do differently because we recognize it's not sustainable, right? We
Yeah.
keep going at this pace, and if we don't have enough automation or we're not using the AI tool, right, we're not going to be able to be prepared for the future. And we've grown 3 times the size in 3 years, and we
Wow.
continue to grow. So you have to start doing some things differently. You can't keep doing things manually.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We have a lot of these conversations just at All Voices too, where it's, we're like, do we have too many meetings? Because we're a
Oh
remote
gosh,
company,
yeah.
right? So we're like, do we
Sure
have too
thing.
many? Do we need all of them? And even, we look at things, and we're a startup. So we're kind of like, startups are kind of known for having
Nope.
insane schedules, over functioning, all of that. And I have to say, and I've been in startups my whole life. I founded a company before. So like,
Yeah.
I know all the
Yeah.
pressures and I know all the things. And the thing that's like the constant thread is the human part. And it's not going to kill your company if you have a summer Friday once a month, but it is going to do a lot for the morale on your
Oh,
team.
completely.
Right. And that's like the balance that I think is like so important, because at the end of the day, this is really a cautionary tale of what happens when your workforce isn't planned properly. And it's like this is what the issues really lead to when you ask too much of people and don't
Yeah.
give them enough resources to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It makes me sad.
Me too.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, we're actually at time. I know I feel like we could talk about this for a long time.
Absolutely.
I have one final question for you. So, what do you think is one assumption about HR that needs to be challenged?
Well, I think from a manager's perspective, either they assume that, that HR couldn't help them. They didn't realize they could escalate, whether it was they had too much on their plate, whether HR could actually be of service. I think that's the one that really stands out to me from the manager's perspective. Um, and then I guess on the workforce planning, I think there's a huge assumption that HR, maybe there was too much on HR's plate here, and
Mhm.
and so they weren't able to do the workforce planning. So um, I think maybe there's a big assumption that HR is going to handle it. So maybe there's some joint accountability here between ops or managers and HR as to that workload. It should be a joint responsibility. So it could be one of those situations where everybody was assuming it was the other person. Yeah.
Yeah. Ooh, very, very well said. Like it could be not just one issue with this one person, but it
Right.
could be a cultural issue that
Mm.
is why it's compounding. Ooh, I love that. I mean, I hate that it happens, but I love that insight. Thank
Right.
you.
You're welcome.
Well, Stacy, thank you so much for being here and talking through this scenario with me. And, in the middle of your book tour too. I know it's like, like I said, I'm so glad that we're able to get some time with you. And thank you for sharing all your insight with us.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here and ask me back another time. Love it. Been great.
Okay, I would love to have you. Yeah. And thank everybody for listening, and I hope you all have a good rest of your day.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.